The airplane disappeared from radar on an ordinary, unremarkable day. There was no storm, no distress call, no panic in the radio transmissions. One moment, the blip representing the passenger aircraft was moving steadily across the controller's screens. The next, it froze, and then vanished, as if someone had simply erased it. At that moment, no one yet understood that they were witnessing the beginning of one of the strangest stories in aviation history, the story of a plane that disappeared and, decades later, was rumored to have appeared again. The flight was operating on a standard route. The aircraft took off on time, the pilots checked in with air traffic control, and the passengers were doing the ordinary things people always do on flights. Some were reading newspapers, some were dozing, others were gazing out of the windows at the slow, drifting clouds. For everyone on board, it was just another routine journey. But somewhere in the middle of the route, the radio communication began to falter. At first, there was light interference. Then there were strange pauses between the crew's responses. The controller called the aircraft several times. And then, at one point, there was simply no answer. Within minutes, the plane vanished from radar. Standard search procedures were immediately initiated. Other aircraft were dispatched, emergency services were alerted, and both civilian and military organizations joined the operation. In the first hours, there was still hope. Sometimes equipment fails. Sometimes aircraft descend below reliable radar coverage. But as the hours passed, then days, it became clear that this was not a simple technical issue. The search continued for weeks. Planes, ships, satellites, every available resource was used to locate even the smallest trace of the missing aircraft. But nothing was found. No wreckage, no life vests, no fuel slick on the water, no emergency beacon signal. The airplane seemed to have dissolved into thin air. For the families of the passengers, it became a nightmare without an ending. When an aviation accident happens, there is tragedy and grief. But there is also a place, a final point, somewhere to say goodbye, somewhere to accept what happened. Here, there was no such point. People waited for years for news. Some believed until the end of their lives that their loved ones were still alive. Years passed. The case slowly moved into the archives. Official explanations changed over time, from technical malfunction, to pilot error, to unusual weather conditions, to even the possibility of an explosion on board. But none of these theories explained the most disturbing detail, the complete absence of physical evidence. That was what made the story so unsettling. Airplanes do not simply disappear. Almost always, something is left behind. And then, decades later, something happened that transformed an old tragedy into a true mystery. A controller at a small airport, a new generation, new technology, new standards, noticed a strange blip on the radar screen. An aircraft appeared in the controlled airspace, but its transponder code did not match any active flight. Even more disturbing, the flight number matched the very plane that had vanished many years earlier. At first, everyone assumed it was a system error. That happens. Corrupted data, software glitches, human mistakes. But the blip kept moving. The aircraft was on a clear course, descending, lining up for approach. When the controller attempted to make contact, something happened that made his hands go cold. A reply came. The voice over the radio was calm and professional, without panic or confusion. The pilot provided standard information, flight number, request for landing clearance, fuel status. Everything sounded normal, as if nothing unusual had happened. But according to all records, this aircraft had not existed for decades. The controller asked for confirmation several times. The voice on the other end responded confidently and calmly, as if it did not understand why the questions were so repetitive. For the crew, this was a routine exchange. For the ground services, it was a shock. The airport was immediately placed on full alert. Management, security, emergency crews, everyone was mobilized within minutes. The aircraft was cleared to land, even though no one truly understood what they were about to witness. When the plane appeared in the sky above the airport, it looked normal, not like a rusted ghost, not like a wreck from another era. It was an ordinary passenger aircraft of an older model, long retired from service, but visually intact. The landing itself was uneventful. The plane touched down, slowed, and came to a stop. From the outside, it looked exactly like a routine arrival. But what happened next is what turned this story into something truly disturbing. When ground crews approached the aircraft, no one exited. The doors remained closed. Through the windows, people could be seen sitting in their seats. Some were staring forward. Some were looking out the windows. No one stood up. No one retrieved their bags. After several minutes of waiting, the decision was made to open the doors manually. Inside were the same passengers and crew members who had been officially listed as missing for decades. And they looked as if, for them, not decades had passed, but only a few hours. Their clothing matched the fashion of that era. Newspapers in passengers' hands carried the dates of that exact day. Food trays looked fresh, as if they had just been served. But the strangest thing was in their eyes. The people were disoriented. They did not understand where they were. For them, the flight had not yet ended. Some asked why they had been kept in the air for so long. Others complained about the delay. None of them realized that an entire generation of time had passed. When they were told the current date, many assumed it was a joke. Then they thought it was a prank. And then panic began to spread. Imagine this. You board a plane, you fly for a few hours, and suddenly you are told that for the rest of the world, 40, 50, or more years have passed. Your parents, your friends, your children, if you had them, are either elderly or gone. The life you knew is over, while for you, only a single day has passed. Some passengers fell silent. Some began to cry. Others refused to believe it to the very end. An investigation was launched, but the more experts examined the situation, the less they understood. The aircraft could not have remained in the air for so long without refueling. The food could not have stayed fresh. The systems could not have functioned for decades without maintenance. And most importantly, there was no physical explanation for where the plane had gone and how it had returned. Theories about time anomalies began to appear. So-called time bubbles, zones where time might behave differently. Scientists, physicists, and researchers of anomalous phenomena all proposed hypotheses, but none could be proven. Official organizations tried to limit the spread of information. The story quickly became tangled in rumors, contradictions, and strange details. Some claimed that the passengers were soon taken to closed facilities. Others said the plane never existed and that the entire story was a misunderstanding or an urban legend. But strange records remained in the archives. Radio transmissions, documents with matching flight numbers, testimonies from people who, on the same day and without coordinating, described the same aircraft and the same landing. And the most unsettling part was the fate of the passengers. According to some versions, many of them were unable to adapt. Imagine the psychological shock. The world you knew is gone. Technologies, cities, even language have changed. You become a person from the past with no real place in the present. Some reportedly disappeared voluntarily. Some died not long after. Some, according to rumors, tried to find their families only to find graves. As for the airplane itself, it was never seen again. Officially, the story was never fully confirmed. For some, it is nothing more than a hoax. For others, it is one of the strangest unsolved cases ever recorded. But one question remains: if a plane could truly disappear in time and return, how many other such stories were never discovered? And what if, somewhere right now, there are people who have already landed, just not in our time yet? Because the most frightening part of this story is not the missing airplane itself. It is the idea that time may not be as reliable and predictable as we believe. And that sometimes, between takeoff and landing, not just a few hours can pass, but an entire lifetime.